Week 16 of the fantasy football season, and here's a few defense DST units I would start this week. The first one, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. So the Bucs, I know their defense hasn't been all that great this season here, but they're still a defense that could go out there and make some plays. And this week they got a great matchup at the Arizona Cardinals with probably McCourty starting a quarterback or Colt McCoy, either one. So this defense, I think, could get pressure in this ball game here, and I think they can make plays, no doubt about it, at Arizona. Teams for Tampa Bay and their defense. Week 13 versus New Orleans, 16 points allowed, 2 sacks. Week 14 in San Francisco, 35 points allowed, a fumble recovery in that one. And Week 15 versus the Cincinnati Bengals, 34 points allowed, 2 sacks and but in that ball game, the offense put their defense in bad positions with 4 turnovers. So right here, 1 week only used as a top defense this week. Here's Tampa Bay at the Arizona Cardinals. They give up the 4th most fantasy points to defenses on the season. And I think the Bucs could have a good game this week, and they're definitely a defense to start. The next one's the San Francisco 49ers. So the 49ers is one of the top units in all fantasy football this season here. And another good matchup with the Washington Commanders coming to town that give up the 8th most fantasy points to defenses on the season. So right here, this defense, one of the top defenses. And this week, they're going to be in my top 2 or 3 at the position. So the last few games here for San Francisco. Week 13 versus Miami, 17 points allowed, 3 sacks, 3 intos, a fumble recovery touchdown. Week 14 versus Tampa Bay, 7 points allowed, 2 intos, a fumble recovery. And Week 15 at Seattle, 13 points allowed, 3 sacks, and a fumble recovery. So right now, this team's getting anywhere from 9 to 15 fantasy points over the last month of the season. And this week, I think Heineke's good for a few turnovers. San Francisco with obviously Nick Bosa leading that defensive line. Just a guy that you know he's going to get a sack or 2 per game. And I think we're going to see it in this one where they hold Washington down to mid-teens, low 20s, and even a mediocre Giant defense had a good game last week versus the Commanders. I think San Francisco comes in this one at home as well, and they put the pressure on Heineke and have a big ball game. The next DST is the Baltimore Ravens. So the Ravens, a great matchup this week here versus Desmond Ridder and Atlanta Falcon offense that really can't move the football. The only way they've been moving the football this season is in the running game with Cordell Patterson and Tyler Algier, who's been impressive over the last couple weeks. But anyway, the last few weeks here for Baltimore, Week 13 versus Denver, 9 points allowed, 2 sacks. Week 14 at Pittsburgh, and that one another good ball game, 14 points allowed, 2 sacks, 3 interceptions. And then last week, a tough ball game to lose, only giving up 13 points, but with no Lamar Jackson, they lost 13-3, 13 points allowed, and 3 sacks. But right here, back home once again, after 2 road games for this Baltimore Raven team. And I think they're going to get to Desmond Ridder early and often. And so far in his first career start, he looks like a guy that holds on to the football way too long. Not quick decision making. And he's going to take a few sacks in this one. So I think Baltimore could be a top 3 defensive unit this week here. And I got him as a start. The next one's the Denver Broncos. So the Broncos, if it's only one bright spot I'll take from this season with this Bronco team here, as this defense goes out there and they play hard even after trading Bradley Chubb and Randy Gregory, who's been out for the season now, going back weeks now at a time. But anyway, the last few games here for Denver. Week 13 at Baltimore, 10 points allowed, 4 sacks, 2 interceptions. Week 14 versus a great Chief offense. You're not going to expect much, but they did have 28 points allowed, 2 sacks, but 3 interceptions on Mahomes, which you never see. And then last week in Week 15 versus Arizona, 15 points allowed, 3 sacks, 3 intos. So this week here, another great matchup at the Rams that give up the 2nd most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. And this Ram team, everyone is injured. The offensive line's a mess. And Baker Mayfield, I know he had that comeback victory, but he came back down to earth last week versus the Green Bay Packers. So right here, this Bronco defense, I think they're going to have 2 or 3 turnovers minimum in this one. I think 2-3 sacks in this. And I think mid-teens, low 20s in a ball game. That's going to be tough to watch from both offensive standpoints here. And I think this Bronco team's a top defense as well in the upper 10 this week. And I got him as a start in the 5th and final defense I have as a start this week here is the Tennessee Titans. So the Titans last week, they held down, for the most part, a solid, obviously, Los Angeles Charger offense to only 17 points. And I know the Titans got the doors blown off in Week 13 and 14, but this week a good matchup versus Houston that gives up the 3rd most fantasy points to DSTs on the season. And right here, this Titan team, this is a must-win ball game now for them after they've lost 4 games in a row. So the last few games here for the defense, Week 13 at Philly, 35 points allowed, 2 sacks. Week 14 versus the Jaguars, 36 points allowed. And then Week 15, the Chargers, a surprising defensive game for them, 17 points allowed, 3 sacks and 2 wins, though. So this week here, I know Houston's been playing better. Gave the Cowboys a run for their money. And then they forced the Chiefs to overtime last week and losing. But right here, I think the Titans at home take care of business. Get to Davis Mills early and often. And it's about running the football and playing defense, and that's how they're built. And going back to week 8 at Houston, 10 points allowed, 3 sacks and an intho. So I could be seeing a similar type of game log there for this Titan defense like they did in week 8 at Houston. So that's a few defense DST units I look to start for week 16 of the fantasy football season.